and welcome to our presentation this evening, which is part of the Rivers Edge Counseling Center Wellness Matters webinar series. My name is Nicole Imgrand, and I'm the owner and director of Rivers Edge Counseling Center. And our presenter this evening, Libby Kostromin, is a practicum student and part of our team since September. The talk tonight is the second to last of our spring series. We have another talk coming up on June 2nd, and you can find information about that webinar on our website on the events page. And also in about a month, we're going to post all of our talks for next year, starting in the fall. So be sure to keep your eye open for that as well. You are always welcome to join us. Our talk this evening will be about 40 minutes or so long, followed by a discussion for those of you who are able to join us. And throughout the presentation, you're welcome to put comments in the chat or questions in the Q&A section, and I'll keep my eye on them, and Libby and I will discuss them in the conversation, the Q&A at the end. So that you don't feel worried about having to jot down notes as you go along and wonder if you'll have access to the information Libby is providing later. I just want to let you know that the recording of the webinar will be posted on the blog a few days following, as well as her presentation and a resource list that she has prepared for us. I was so excited when Libby shared her topic for this evening with me, because it's such an important conversation to have, and not one that we have often enough. And I was hoping we would have some adventurous souls join us for this journey tonight. And so we are very glad that you are here with us. I'll take a moment to just introduce Libby to you. Libby has had a richly rewarding career as an organizational developmental consultant in Melbourne, Australia, helping people in all kinds of organizations to learn and change. Life then led her to Canada, lucky for us, and the Masters of Psychotherapy and Spirituality program at St. Stephen's College here in Edmonton. Through her studies and her own ongoing personal journey of exploration, Libby continues to work with people navigating challenges and change across all areas of life. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Nicole. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Wellness Matters talk about death. It might seem incongruous to be talking about death in the context of well-being and health. If that doesn't already make sense to you, then my hope is that by the end of this talk, the connection will be clearer. I'd first like to make an observation about you, this group of us, gathered here tonight to participate in a conversation about death. In Western cultures, especially, discussions about death are rarely a common part of our interactions. So much so that the reality of death can seem too much for many people to face. And yet here you all are, with the courage and the willingness to do just that. What's more, we're in the middle of a pandemic. To be totally honest, I have been wondering what on earth I was thinking, proposing a talk about death at this time. COVID has brought us all a lot closer to our own impermanence. And in some way, that presents an unusual opportunity to examine our own relationship with death. I'm not here this evening as any kind of expert on death. For one thing, I'm still alive, so that's kind of impossible. I do think death is one of the most intimate and deeply personal challenges we face as human beings. And it's a huge topic. Tonight is not so much a talk about death in the way that we might stand back and assess it from a safe distance, but more of an invitation to step in and actually contemplate your own mortality, to take a closer look at your relationship with death, how you feel about it, what it means to you, the place that it occupies in the landscape of your life. Because the bottom line is this: As parents, friends, partners, relatives, carers, and health professionals, our capacity to talk honestly and openly about death depends on our own relationship with death, on the extent to which we have come to terms with our own mortality. So first, let's do a bit of a poll. Right here, right now, I invite you to take a moment to quietly contemplate your own death. Notice the feelings that arise as you allow yourself to briefly imagine no longer being alive. When you are ready, click on the link in the chat and select the appropriate response to the question. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest, what is your level of fear or anxiety when you think about death? I'm going to share the results of the poll. It's completely anonymous, so please feel free to be honest and open. Oh, it doesn't seem like it's working for some reason.
Libby, so what I find is it actually asks Microsoft wants something from us. It wants us.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
And not everyone will have an account. But what people are starting to do is in the chat, put some responses. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Nicole. Sorry about that, everyone. Please put a comment in the chat of your rating between 1 as a low anxiety and 5 as high anxiety, just so we can get a sense of what you're experiencing. One, 3, 4, 4, 5, 1 high. Wow, we've got a real spread here. Thank you for those who are willing to share. And I will say that for those of you who experience high anxiety when you consider the prospect of death, I just want you to take care as you listen and participate in this discussion. Please look after yourself and make sure that you take any measures that you need to keep yourself safe and well. Thank you, everyone, for participating. So, let's talk about death, shall we? In this webinar, we'll explore realities of death and dying in Canada, common feelings and responses to mortality and death, perspectives on death as part of life, ways to accept death and invite it into your life, and when and how to talk about death. Let's start with some truths about death and dying. A recent study has revealed some alarming factors. Being alive creates an incredibly large risk of dying. The study found that the actual death rate was a full 100%. The researchers came to the conclusion that being alive is far too dangerous, and the recommendation is to not be born at all. In 2018, the Vanier Institute of the Family conducted extensive research on desires and realities of death and dying in Canada. What they discovered is that most of us want to live forever. And the reality is, we won't. Most of us want to be fully able and then suddenly die in our sleep. The reality is, only a small minority of Canadians experience sudden death. The reality of dying in the 21st century is that death frequently occurs after a long, lingering dying process that requires ongoing and often intensive care and support. Most of us want to die at home. The reality is that most Canadians die in hospital. Most of us want to die pain-free. The reality is that many people are able to have their pain alleviated once they receive palliative medical care. And we want to die with dignity. But many people believe that having to depend on others to meet our personal care needs is inherently demeaning. But dignity resides in the quality and nature of the end-of-life care provided, and in the attitudes of both the caregiver and the recipient of care. As we saw from the poll earlier, there are a range of possible responses to the reality of death. We live in a culture that denies death. We're taught that death is something we should shy away from and try to forget about. We're told that if we spend time pondering our own mortality, we're likely to become anxious and depressed. Or will we? Within psychology, something unpleasantly named terror management theory studies how we react when death is made salient to us. Terror management theory essentially suggests that large groups and even entire societies make decisions or put them off, primarily to avoid thoughts of death. Terror management theory arose out of anthropologist Ernest Becker's 1973 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, in which Becker argues that most human action is about ignoring or avoiding the inevitability of death. Terror management theory suggests that our fear of death generates a fundamental anxiety and unease, which we try to offset with status-seeking behaviour or by strongly defending the values of our culture. Studies have shown that when people are made more aware of their own mortality, they tend to become more nationalistic, more tribal, and more materialistic. However, other studies show that when as individuals we come close to a near-death experience, we become more tolerant of others' differences. We have a better understanding of ourselves, we appreciate nature more, and we find greater meaning in our lives. So why does awareness of death have a positive effect on some people but not on others? To a large extent, it seems to depend on the intensity of our encounter with mortality. Anxiety is much more likely when we're passively aware of death, thinking about it as a distant possibility rather than actually facing up to it. Once life's fragility becomes a personal truth instead of a philosophical concept, something that happens to other people, we become more capable of celebrating the opportunities and experiences that remain instead of focusing on everyday hassles. Acknowledging our impermanence makes us more mindful of life's small moments and our relationships with others. So in summary, when our relationship with death makes us anxious instead of reflective, we'll generally try to defend our worldview through moralising, nationalism, aggression, and even support for war. But when we face up to death, actively and directly, there's a much higher chance that we'll transcend anxiety and insecurity and experience the transformational potential that is possible. The transformational effects of confronting death include a new ability to live in the present, a much more appreciative attitude and gratitude for things that were previously taken for granted. The world itself feels more real, vivid, beautiful. A shift from ego-centeredness to altruism. A letting go of attachment to ambitions, fears, material goods, or social status. An attitude of acceptance is important in all of this too. If we resist death, fight against its inevitability, refuse to let go of our lives and feel bitter about all the things that we're going to have to lose, then we're much less likely to experience the potentially positive effects. About 10 years ago, I came across a wonderful book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. The author, Bronnie Ware, is an Australian nurse who spent several years working in palliative care, looking after patients in the last 12 weeks of their lives. Ware did her own research on what her patients shared with her in their last weeks, and she eventually compiled a list of top 5 regrets expressed by people directly facing the end of their life. The 5th most common regret was, I wish that I had let myself be happier. Many people did not realise until the end that happiness is a choice. They had stayed stuck in old patterns and habits. Fear of change had them pretending to others and to themselves that they were content, when deep within they longed to laugh properly and have silliness in their lives again. The 4th most common regret was, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Often people would not truly realise the benefits of old friends until their dying weeks, and it was not always possible to track them down. Many had become so caught up in their own lives that they had let golden friendships slip by over the years. There were deep regrets about not giving friendships the time and effort they deserved. The 3rd most common regret was, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Many people felt that they had suppressed their feelings in order to keep peace with others. As a result, they settled for a mediocre existence and never became who they were truly capable of becoming. Many developed illnesses relating to the bitterness and resentment they carried as a result. The 2nd most common regret was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. This regret was expressed by every male patient that Bronnie Ware nursed. They felt they had missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All of the men Ware nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives focused on work. And the single most common regret was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. This was the most common regret of all. When people realise that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it's easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honoured even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that this was due to choices that they had made or not made in the course of their lives. While death is a biological fact of life, it is also a human, social, philosophical, and spiritual issue that impacts each and every one of us. Let's take a look now at some different perspectives on death and dying. In the mid-1990s, when I was about 30, I came across the Tibetan book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. The book is a presentation of the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Apparently, Rinpoche was encouraged to write it by, amongst others, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the Swiss-American psychiatrist whose research and writing on death and dying continues to be widely recognised and relevant today. The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying completely changed my perspective on death. I learned that Tibetan Buddhists see life as preparation for death, and this resonated very deeply within me. Tibetan literature is full of admonitions to be aware of the inevitability of death, the preciousness of the opportunities that a human birth presents, and the great value of mindfulness of death. In the foreword to the book, the 14th Dalai Lama writes, as a Buddhist, I view death as a normal process, a reality that I accept will occur as long as I remain in this earthly existence. Knowing that I cannot escape it, I see no point in worrying about it. I tend to think of death as being like changing your clothes when they are old and worn out, rather than as some final end. Yet death is unpredictable. We do not know when or how it will take place. So it is only sensible to take certain precautions before it actually happens. Naturally, most of us would like to die a peaceful death, but it is also clear that we cannot hope to die peacefully if our lives have been full of violence or if our minds have mostly been agitated by emotions like anger, attachment, or fear. So if we wish to die well, we must learn how to live well. Hoping for a peaceful death, we must cultivate peace in our mind and in our way of life. Buddhism attends directly and beautifully to the fact of our impermanence, and many other spiritual and religious traditions also address the need to acknowledge and prepare wisely for death. Native Americans cultivate an openness to death through the repeated singing of a death chant over the course of one's life. It's an instant centering technique to keep the heart open and the mind clear, even in great adversity. Having made this technique a part of their life, many are able to die with great clarity. In Hasidic Judaism, there is a teaching that has to do with being ready for whatever the moment may offer. The cultivation of an openness to the unknown, so that whatever occurs, you will be fully present for it. That kind of presence is the perfect preparation for death. In the Hindu tradition, there is another version of this kind of presence for life and death. It's taught and practiced that to die with God's name on your lips is a way of consciously returning to the source. In an instant, you can drop the mind's projections of the world and just be with it as it is. When Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, shot through the heart, as he fell, he uttered the word Ram, the name of one of the gods in the Hindu tradition. Whatever prepares you for death enhances life. Gandhi's closeness to God, the death chant, the Hasidic openness to the unknown all make life a richer experience. It's not just the sages and saints throughout the centuries who admonish us to get up close and personal with death as a way to live a fulfilling life. Entire schools of philosophy are devoted to questions about the nature of existence, of reality, of identity. The 16th century French philosopher Michel de Montaigne wrote, to begin depriving death of its greatest advantage over us, let us adopt a way clean contrary to that common one. Let us deprive death of its strangeness. Let us frequent it. Let us get used to it. Let us have nothing more often in mind than death. We do not know where death awaits us, so let us wait for it everywhere. To practice death is to practice freedom. A man who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. Literature, poetry, art, and music are replete with similar invitations. The Czech poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "There is death in life, and it astonishes me that we pretend to ignore this. Death, whose unforgiving presence we experience with each change we survive, because we must learn to die slowly. We must learn to die. That is all of life, to prepare gradually the masterpiece of a proud and supreme death, of a death where chance plays no part, of a well-made, beatific and enthusiastic death of the kind the saints knew to shape. The American poet Mary Oliver wrote a poem entitled When Death Comes, and I'd like to share it with you now. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy and as singular. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence, and each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. As we can see, spirituality, religion, philosophy, and literature have been attending to the mysteries of death for centuries. From that perspective, psychology is a little late to the party on this topic. In the last 50 years, the psychology of death has been dominated by research on death anxiety. There was very little research on death acceptance or how to facilitate that. However, existential psychotherapy, which arose from existential philosophy, does attend to what Irvin Yalom calls the four ultimate concerns of life: death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. For existentialists, accepting the reality of death allows a person to develop self-awareness and to be responsible for the actions taken in his or her life. In existentialism, living well means making choices according to our own inner compass. A good life is an authentic life in which we've taken responsibility for our actions in line with our own deeper knowing of ourself, our values, and our intentions. Existential psychologists suggest that death acceptance holds the key to living a vital, authentic, and meaningful life. That the most effective way to protect ourselves against the terror of death is to actively pursue the task of living a meaningful life despite the shadow of death. Similarly, meaning-centered psychotherapy tells us that meaning, or having a sense that one's life has meaning, involves the conviction that one is that one is fulfilling a unique role and purpose in life that is a gift. This comes with a responsibility to live to one's full potential as a human being. In so doing, one gains a sense of peace, contentment, or even transcendence through connectedness with something greater than oneself. Authors Breitbart and Applebaum suggest that there are four main sources of meaning: creativity, through work, deeds, and dedication to causes; experience, through art, nature, humour, love, and relationships; attitudes, like the stance one takes towards suffering or death or other existential problems; and legacy, relating to past, present, and future. Over the years that followed my reading of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, my own fears subsided as I began to face and relate to the inevitability of death. In October 2014, I wrote in my journal, "I no longer fear death. The floor-dropping shudder, the emptiness is no longer there at the thought. Instead, there's an openness, an acceptance, perhaps even a surrender. Life is so short that to spend it fearing death seems like the ultimate waste of time." Around that time, I read a conversation between two people about death. I don't remember who they were. The first one was asking, "How can I relate to death as part of my life?" And the second person answered, "Dance with it." These days, I think about living life in a kind of dance with death, the two intertwined and interconnected, each only ever truly made possible by the other. What might your own dance with death look like? How can you invite death to be part of your life? Here's some ideas for you to explore. Maranasati, or mindfulness of death and death awareness, is a Buddhist meditation practice of remembering that death can strike at any time. This and other mindfulness meditation practices can help you become more familiar with the depth of your interior to help cultivate an open, calm relationship to death. Oops, sorry. There are many wonderful online resources that can encourage you to explore ideas and practicalities to death. One example is the Order of the Good Death, a death acceptance organisation founded by mortician and author Caitlin Doughty. The group advocates for natural burial and embracing human mortality, accepting that death itself is nature, but the death anxiety of modern culture is not. Another option is to attend a death cafe. Death cafes are groups of people, generally strangers, who come together to talk about death as a way to reduce the fear and mystery that surrounds it. They were started by Swiss anthropologist Bernard Cretas in 2004, and there's currently over 6,000 active death cafes around the world, including one in Edmonton. One participant said, "What I love about death cafes is how refreshing it is to be able to talk about death without having to whisper or worry about someone telling us we're being morbid." We Croak is a free app inspired by a Bhutanese folk saying, "To be a happy person, one must contemplate death 5 times daily." Each day, We Croak sends you 5 invitations to stop and think about death. The invitations come at random times and at any moment, just like death. The quotes are from poets, philosophers, and notable thinkers. They encourage you to take one moment for contemplation, conscious breathing, or meditation. The We Croak people believe that a regular practice of contemplating mortality helps us let go of things that don't matter and honour the things that do. People find all kinds of ways to become more accepting of death. German photographer Walter Schell's had a deep dread of death. His way of facing it was to embark on a project to photograph the dying before and after their deaths. I stumbled across an exhibition of his photographs when I visited Montreal in 2012. I still remember the poignancy of standing in the middle of the beautiful art gallery with all the walls around me filled with black and white photographs of people before and just after they had died. I'd like to show a couple of these photographs now. If you think you might find them distressing, please look away from the screen. I'll let you know when it's safe to return your eyes to the screen. If you looked away, you can turn back now. Perhaps the simplest and easiest way to face our fears about death is to talk about them. Don't wait until you or someone you love is dying before you start to talk about death. If you make conversations about death and dying part of your life, you'll be much better prepared to deal with the realities and practicalities of death when they directly affect you. Try talking with friends and family about how you want to live as you age, the kind of legacy you want to leave, how you'd like to approach death and how you'd like to die, how you want to be cared for and how you'd like to care for others, how you want to show up in this last stage of your own life and in the lives of people you love, and what individual, family and community resources and supports will you need to be able to manage end of life with dignity, respect and comfort. What about having conversations with a dying person? Here are some tips. First and foremost, listen. The most important gift you can give to a dying person is to listen. Be respectful. None of us truly knows what is going to happen after death, whatever our religious and spiritual beliefs. It's important not to force our viewpoint onto another. This is their experience. Be honest. Often in difficult situations, we search for the right or the clever thing to say, or we deny what's happening or make a joke of it. While such reactions are understandable, humour has an important place too, even in death. Dying is a profound process that just needs us to be there and perhaps hold a hand. The act of sharing ourselves openly and honestly can be very liberating and soothing for the dying person. Use engaged body language. Don't be afraid to look your relative or friend in the eye. Be alert and attentive to what they're telling you and the way they are saying it. Listen to their tone of voice and be aware of changes to their facial colour, their willingness to engage with you, their willingness to meet your eyes. Watch their body language. Is what they are saying really what they mean? Are they asking you something with their body language that they're not expressing with words? If so, invite them to tell you what they really want to say. Stay calm. You might feel embarrassed by emotional intimacy or fearful of seeing your relative or friend cry or become helpless and vulnerable. Breathe slowly to calm yourself. And stay grounded. Ground yourself by physically feeling your feet firmly on the floor. This will help you to be present and accepting of what's happening. Try indirect questions such as, I wonder whether there's anything you want to talk to me about, or perhaps there's something bothering you which you want to tell me about, or what can I do to help you at this moment? This gives your relative or friend the choice to respond or to say no. Providing choice is empowering. They may decline initially, but will know the door is open if they want to talk about it later. Indirect exploring questions give the signal that you are safe to talk to and that you care. You can also gently ask leading questions to find out how they're feeling, such as, if you become really ill, would you like me to sit with you? Or if you become ill, what medical care would you like? Or have you ever thought about what you want to do with your belongings? Have you thought about what kind of service you want at your funeral? Again, this provides the dying person with the choice to respond or not. Make short statements that can provide comfort. You might say, if there ever comes a time when you want to talk about something or you feel frightened, please do tell me. This gives your relative or friend permission to talk in his or her own time without expectation. Don't fear tears. It's okay to cry. Crying is a natural response to emotionally charged situations. Being brave enough to express your grief can have a powerful healing effect on your relationship, as well as giving a relative or friend permission to grieve for the life that he or she is leaving behind. Learn to sit with silence. Don't feel you have to talk all the time. Just being there quietly at the bedside is important and can often be surprisingly peaceful. If, as parents, we're not able to talk about death and dying in an open, healthy, constructive way, this is really unfortunate for kids. As a result, they wind up making sense of death and loss on their own, when the subject could be a way for adults to give them the tools and resources they need to explore their world, to imagine their life, and to begin wrestling with this part of the human condition. I've included some articles and books for parents and kids in the resource list that will be available on the River's Edge website after this talk. A final word to those of you who currently work in caring professions. When it comes to death and dying, our capacity to provide high quality end-of-life care and to support others in explorations towards and around death depends heavily upon the extent to which we have addressed our own fears about death. As I said at the beginning, the bottom line is this: as parents, friends, partners, relatives, carers, and health professionals, our capacity to talk openly and honestly about death depends on the health of our relationship with death, on the extent to which we have befriended it and invited it to play its part in our lives. The quality of presence that you as a professional are able to provide your patient or client depends on your capacity to connect first with your own source of well-being, peace, and personal harmony. In closing, I'd like to offer this. One day we will die, Snoopy. Yes, but every other day we will live. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. For those of you who are unable to join us for the Q&A, I want to thank you for your time with us this evening and remind you that you are always welcome to join us for these talks. And if you have questions later that come to you, you're welcome to send me an email and I'll be sure to forward it to Libby. And we hope to see you again soon. Take care.